She was 8 months pregnant, barefoot on wet pavement, and the man she had loved for 6 years was watching her from the doorway of the mansion she had helped him build, watching her collapse in the rain, and he did not move. He did not call for help. He simply turned away and closed the door. Damian Morello had made his choice, and in that single, merciless moment, he made the worst mistake of his life. Because the woman he left dying in the street was not just his wife. She was the only person alive who had the power to take everything from him. If you want to know how a broken woman rises to become the most dangerous player in a criminal empire, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The rain came down hard that night, the kind of rain that didn't care about anything. Not the expensive cars lining the circular driveway, not the manicured hedges standing attention along the iron fence, not the woman crouched on the stone steps with both hands pressed flat against her stomach and every muscle in her body locked against the pain rolling through her in waves. Serena Valenti Morello was 31 years old. She had dark hair plastered to her face and a white silk robe, something she'd grabbed blindly on her way out of the bedroom, now soaked through and clinging to every part of her that had grown heavy with pregnancy over the past 8 months. Her feet were bare. She hadn't thought to grab shoes. She hadn't thought at all. She had simply been pushed, and then she had fallen, and now she was here, on the steps of the house she had lived in for 4 years, with the front door shut behind her and the pain in her lower back building into something that no longer felt like pressure. It felt like her body was splitting open. She pressed her forehead against the wet stone of the step above her and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the doctor had told her. She counted. She tried to count. She got to 3 before the next contraction hit, and the counting fell apart. Inside the house, the lights were still on. She could see them through the tall windows, warm amber bleeding out into the rain. She could see the shape of the chandelier in the main foyer, the one she had chosen herself from a catalog in Milan, the one she had argued with Damian's interior designer about for 3 weeks, because she wanted something that looked like it had weight and permanence, rather than the glass confetti the designer kept pushing. She had won that argument. She had won most of the arguments about that house. She had spent 2 years making it into something that looked like a home, and now she was outside of it, in the rain, alone. She had known something was wrong the moment she came downstairs and found Isabella Raines sitting at the kitchen island in one of Damian's shirts. Not a guest shirt. Not a robe pulled from the linen closet where Damian kept the extras for people who stayed over after late meetings or card games. One of his actual shirts. The blue Thomas pink one with the small monogram on the cuff. The one Serena had given him for his birthday 3 years ago because she had read somewhere that he liked that brand and she had wanted to give him something personal. Isabella had been eating fruit from a glass bowl, legs crossed on the bar stool, completely at ease, and she had looked at Serena coming down the stairs with the particular kind of expression that women wear when they have already decided the outcome of a confrontation before it starts. Serena had stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She had looked at Isabella. She had looked at the shirt. And she had understood in the space of 2 seconds what had apparently been true for a very long time. Damian. She had said his name once, clearly, without raising her voice. She was good at that, at keeping her voice even when every other part of her was not even at all. He had come from the direction of the study. I was dressed, which surprised her. She had expected some version of dishevelment, some physical evidence of what the night had been. But he was in dark trousers and a clean dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was holding a glass of whiskey, and he looked at her the way he sometimes looked at problems that had appeared on his desk without explanation. Not angry, not guilty, calculating. Serena. He said her name the same way she had said his, flat, a marker in space. How long? She said. He didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his whiskey, set the glass on the small side table near the bottom of the stairs. He was 40 years old, Damian Morello, and he was one of those men who had been built by the world rather than softened by it, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete, and dark eyes that had never once in all the time Serena had known him communicated anything he didn't intend to communicate. I was not a man who let things slip. Long enough, he said. She had thought she might cry. She had thought that would be the natural thing. The thing that would happen to a woman 8 months pregnant with the child of a man who had just told her, without words, that he had been sleeping with someone else long enough to bring that someone else into the house they shared. She had thought tears would come. They didn't. What came instead was a terrible stillness in her chest, the kind that isn't peace at all, but is the thing that happens right before the worst part of something begins. "I want her out of this house," Serena said. Isabella, still at the kitchen island, made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Not quite. Damien looked at Serena. "No," he said. The word sat there. "No," she repeated. "Isabella is staying." He picked up his whiskey again. "You can take the guest suite tonight. We'll have a conversation in the morning about the arrangement going forward." Serena felt her hands go very cold. The arrangement. "The house stays mine, obviously. You'll be provided for, financially. I'm not a cruel man. Don't." The word came out sharp enough that he stopped. She moved toward him. Not fast. She couldn't move fast anymore. Not with the weight she was carrying. But deliberately, the way she had learned to move through this marriage. With intention, with the full understanding that in Damien Morello's world, only deliberate things were respected. "Don't tell me you're not a cruel man. I know exactly what you are." Something shifted in his eyes. Not regret. Something harder. "You knew what this life was when you chose it," he said. "I chose you," she said. "Not the life." "Same thing." She looked at him for a long moment. 6 years. She had known this man for 6 years, had loved him for most of them, had believed, with a stubbornness that she now understood was not strength but a kind of willful blindness, that the parts of him capable of love were real and permanent and would outlast the parts of him capable of everything else. She had believed that. She had built a life on it. She had a child growing inside her at this moment, a child that was his, and she had believed all of it. "I want to speak to you alone," she said. "Send her somewhere." "She's fine where she is." "Damien." "Serena." His voice dropped. Not softer, quieter, which was different. With Damien, quiet was never gentleness. It was precision. "I've made my decision. You should rest tonight. We'll discuss the details in the morning." "What details?" Her voice was flat now, too. She had caught it from him, that flatness, over the years. She had not realized it until this moment. "What exactly are we discussing?" "You'll keep the apartment on Meridian. Monthly allowance, whatever you need for the child, our child. For the child. Medical care. Security detail, for the first year at least." He tilted his head slightly, which was what he did when he thought he was being generous. "I'm not trying to make this difficult. You just threw me out of my marriage. I'm clarifying the terms of a situation that has already changed." He said it like he was talking about a business restructuring, like she was a subsidiary he was spinning off. "You're a smart woman. You understand how these things go." What happened next, Serena had not planned. She did not think of herself as a woman who threw things. She had never thrown anything at him in 6 years of marriage, despite adequate provocation on multiple occasions. But her hand found the whiskey glass on the side table, and the glass left her hand before the thought to throw it fully completed itself, and it shattered against the wall behind Damien's shoulder. The house went very quiet. Isabella stopped moving on the bar stool. Damien's expression did not change. That was the most frightening thing, that he simply stood there with the look of someone whose prediction had been confirmed. "Get her out," he said. He wasn't talking to Serena. He was talking to someone behind her. Marcus, she realized when she heard the footstep on the tile. Marcus Reyes, Damien's head of security, who had been standing at the edge of the hallway this whole time like a piece of furniture she hadn't noticed. Damien. His name again. She said it differently this time, with something she had not used in this house in a long time. The version of her voice that didn't accommodate. "I am 8 months pregnant." "I know. If you put me out of this house tonight, you have family you can call. The car will take you wherever you need to go." "The baby isn't due for Serena." He said her name one last time, and there was something in his face, finally, that she recognized. Not regret, not guilt, not even cruelty exactly. It was the particular exhaustion of a man who has already moved on and doesn't understand why the old thing keeps trying to hold on. He was looking at her the way people look at something that used to matter. "We're done." And Marcus Reyes, who had worked for Damien for 11 years and had always been professionally kind to Serena in the impersonal way of men who follow orders above all other loyalties, put his hand on her arm with something approaching gentleness and guided her to the front door. She had been given 30 seconds to collect what she could from the foyer. her phone, which was on the entry table, and nothing else. And then the door had closed behind her and the rain had started immediately. Or maybe the rain had already been falling. She couldn't be sure, because everything after the click of the door latch had compressed into a sequence of physical sensations without clean narrative between them. Now she was on the steps. The pain came again. Lower than the back now. She recognized it the way you recognize something you've only read about. The cramping, pulling character of it, the way it seemed to originate at the base of her spine and radiate forward. She had read every chapter of her pregnancy books about labor. She had taken the classes. She had sat in those sessions and listened and tried to absorb all of it, and somewhere in the back of her mind there had always been the assumption that she would be in a hospital when it happened, with a doctor who knew her case, and Damien. She had always assumed Damien would be there. She picked up her phone. The screen was cracked from where she had landed on the steps. It still worked. She called her cousin Petra. Petra answered on the second ring. "It's almost midnight," she said. "What?" "I need you to come." Serena heard her own voice and noted from a distance that it sounded completely calm. "The address is 14 Ashford Drive. Come to the main gate and call me when you're close, and I'll figure out how to get it open." She paused. "Bring your car. Something with room in the back." "Serena." The sleep left Petra's voice in an instant. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I think I'm in labor," Serena said. "So come quickly." She hung up. She pressed her back against the stone balustrade and focused on the rain and breathed and did not allow herself to think about Damien or about the lights still on inside the house or about Isabella Raines eating fruit at the kitchen island in someone else's shirt. She allowed herself to think about only the things directly in front of her, the next breath, the next contraction, the gate code, and her cousin's headlights appearing at the end of the long driveway. Petra arrived in 11 minutes. It felt like an hour, and also like no time at all. She came out of the car at a run, in jeans and a rain jacket thrown over what appeared to be pajama pants, and when she got to Serena, her face did something complicated. The face of a woman taking in a situation and making herself be useful before she allows herself to react. "Okay," Petra said. "Okay, I've got you. How far apart?" "I don't know. I wasn't timing." "It's fine. We're going." Petra got her arm under Serena's and they moved down the steps together, and Serena did not look back at the house. Would not let herself look back. And then she was in the back seat with Petra's rain jacket folded under her, and her cousin was in the front and the gate was opening. She had managed the code on the intercom. And the Ashford Drive address was behind them. She had nothing. A cracked phone. No wallet. The clothes on her back. A child that was about to be born into a world where her father had already decided she was a problem to be managed. At the hospital, they asked her name, and she said Serena Valenti, which surprised her. She had been Serena Morello for 4 years, and the shift back to her birth name was not something she had planned, but it came out anyway, the name she had grown up with, the name that belonged to a girl who had existed before Damien, and she did not correct it. She was in labor for 9 hours. Petra stayed with her for all of it, holding her hand through the contractions, making dry jokes at the wrong moments in the way that only Petra could make work, chasing down nurses with a focused determination that reminded Serena of why she had chosen Petra as her closest person when most of her other relationships had been gradually eroded by life inside the Morello orbit. Petra had never been easy to erode. Petra was constitutionally resistant to orbits that were not her own. At 6:42 in the morning, in a delivery room in Mercy General Hospital, Serena Valenti pushed for the last time. The baby was small and purple-faced and furious about existence, which Serena thought was exactly right. She cried. The baby first, and then Serena, which she had not expected and could not stop. Not the gentle crying of movies, the ugly kind, the kind that had been backed up for 9 hours and maybe longer than that, backed up for years behind the walls she had spent 6 years building inside herself, because crying in Damien Morello's world was something you did in private, or you did not do at all. "She's perfect," Petra said. Her voice cracked on the word. "She's loud," Serena said. "She gets it from you." Serena looked at her daughter, actually looked, took her in, the whole complicated, impossible fact of her, the dark hair already dense against her skull, the hands clenching and unclenching, the mouth open in an ongoing argument with the universe about the indignity of arrival. She felt something happen in her chest that she had no word for yet. Not love exactly, or not only love, something more structural than love, something that went down into her foundation and reorganized it. She named her Leah, not the name she and Damien had discussed. He had wanted something Italian, classical, something that sounded like it belonged on a nameplate in a law firm. She had been leaning that direction. But she looked at her daughter and said, Leah, and it was immediately and permanently true in a way that nothing about the name discussions with Damien had ever been. Leah Valenti, she said, testing it. Yes. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days. During those 2 days, Damien did not call. He did not send anyone. No flowers arrived. No message came through Marcus or any of the other security staff she had known over 4 years of being the wife of a man who required constant security. Nothing. The silence was so complete that one of the nurses, a young woman who had been attentive and kind through the delivery, asked if there was someone she should contact, a partner, a family member. My cousin is here, Serena said. That's everyone. On the second day, a lawyer came. Not Damien, not any representative of him personally. A lawyer from her own family's estate, a man named Raymond Cho, who had been managing the Valenti family accounts for 12 years, and who had found her through Petra after Petra had placed a call explaining the situation. Raymond Cho was small and precise in the way of men who have spent their careers making other people's problems into navigable paperwork, and he sat in the chair beside her bed with a manila folder on his lap and told her what she already knew but had never once activated. Her father, Elliot Valenti, had died 8 years ago. He had died before Serena met Damien. He had been a man of quiet and deliberate wealth, not the visible, performative wealth of people like Damien Morello, but the kind that accumulates in real estate holdings and investment portfolios and does not require anyone to know about it. He had built it over 30 years, and he had left it, in its entirety, to his only daughter. $52 million, as of the current market valuation, in trusts, in assets, in holdings across 4 states. She had touched none of it, not because she didn't know it was there. She had signed documents. She had read the letters from Raymond Cho's office. She had understood the broad shape of her inheritance. But because she had not needed it. Because Damien had money. Because she understood now with a clarity that felt like swallowing something sharp, doing what women in certain kinds of marriages do, making herself small inside someone else's wealth, so she would feel appropriately grateful rather than unpleasantly equal. She had been a fool. She had been a brilliant, educated, strategically capable fool. I want to begin activating the trust, she told Raymond Cho. He nodded. He had the folder open. He had, she suspected, been ready for this call for years. I've taken the liberty of preparing several documents in the event. All of it, she said. Everything. I want full access and I want to understand exactly what I'm working with. Raymond Cho looked at her over the rim of his glasses. She was 24 hours postpartum. She had a newborn sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. She had been thrown out of her home in the rain the night before her daughter was born. He looked at her, and something in his expression settled into a kind of respect that was different from professional courtesy. Of course, he said. She held Leah and read through the documents with Raymond Cho for 3 hours. Petra came back from the cafeteria with terrible coffee and sat in the corner and did not interrupt. By the end of those 3 hours, Serena Valenti, not Morello, never Morello again, understood 3 things with a clarity she had never had before about her own life. She understood that she was not powerless. She understood that she had never been powerless. And she understood that Damien Morello had made a catastrophic mistake, and that he was going to spend the next several years learning the exact shape and weight of it. She did not make any declarations about this. She did not say it aloud. She simply closed the last folder, thanked Raymond Cho, told him she would be in touch next week, and then turned to look at her daughter sleeping in the bassinet with her hands curled against her chest. We're okay, she said to Leah, to herself. We're going to be okay. Petra, from the corner. I know you're not asking for my opinion. I'm not. But for what it's worth, Petra. You're terrifying when you're calm. I just want you to know that. It's always been true and I should have said it sooner. Serena almost smiled. The first time in 2 days. They left the hospital on a Thursday morning in early October, Serena and Leah and Petra, in Petra's car with the infant carrier borrowed from the hospital's discharge loaner program, because they hadn't thought to bring one. The city was loud and indifferent around them, the way cities are, full of people who did not know that something significant had just shifted. Serena looked out the window at the street she had driven through for 6 years in Damien's cars, with Damien's security detail, and she thought about how different everything looks from the passenger side when the driver is someone who is on your side. She moved into Petra's apartment that day. A 2-bedroom in a building in the Lakeview district, clean and modest and nothing at all like the Ashford Drive mansion. Serena had a duffel bag of clothes that Petra had gathered for her, and a baby and a cracked phone and $52 million in dormant assets that nobody in Damien Morello's world knew anything about. She spent the first week not sleeping, not because of the baby only, though Leah had opinions about sleep that she expressed at high volume, but because her mind would not stop running the inventory of what she knew about Damien's operation, what she knew about his financial structure, the legitimate businesses that served as the public face of the Morello organization, the shell companies, the real estate, the cash flow channels. She had not been in the inner circle, Damien had been careful about that, careful about keeping her separate from the operational details. But she had lived in that house for 4 years, and she had been paying attention even when he assumed she wasn't, because she was just the wife, just the woman at the dinner table who smiled at the right times and kept the household and carried his child. She had been paying attention the entire time. She sat at Petra's kitchen table in the small hours while Leah slept in the next room, and she wrote things down in a notebook. Not a strategy yet, just inventory, names, business names, addresses she had heard mentioned, figures that had come up in conversations she hadn't been meant to remember. The name of the bank and the Cayman structure that Damien's CFO, a nervous man named Walter Briggs, had mentioned at a dinner once while half drunk and immediately regretted mentioning. The name of a silent partner in the Dunmore Street development project that didn't appear on any public documents. The name of a city council member who had received a check from a Morello subsidiary and whose vote on the harbor redevelopment project had, 3 weeks later, been exactly what Damien had needed it to be. She wrote it all down. By the end of the week, the notebook had 40 pages. She also called Raymond Cho again and told him she wanted to begin making investments. Quiet investments. Nothing that announced itself. She was interested in specific real estate holdings in the commercial sector. She named 3 properties. And she was interested in acquiring a minority stake in a financial services firm named Callaway Group, which she had heard mentioned in Damien's house in a context that had told her the Callaway Group was important to Damien's legitimate revenue structure in ways that were not fully reflected in the firm's public filings. Raymond Cho was quiet for a moment on the phone. Then, "You've been doing research." "I've had time to think," she said. "These are not small moves, Serena." "No," she said. "They're not." She was feeding Leah while she talked, and Leah was eating with the focused intensity she brought to everything, completely indifferent to strategy. "I don't want to make small moves. I want to make exactly the right moves in exactly the right order. Can you help me with that?" "That's what you pay me for," Raymond Cho said. "Good. Start with the Callaway Group. And Raymond, I need this to be completely invisible. Nothing that traces back to my name. We're going to need structures." "I can build structures," he said. "I know you can. I've seen your paperwork." She paused. "I read all of it this time, not just the summary pages." Another pause. Then something in his voice that she had not heard from him before. Something that might have been the professional equivalent of what Petra would call being impressed. "I'll have preliminary documents to you by Friday." She hung up. Leah finished eating and fell asleep against her shoulder with the immediate and total commitment to unconsciousness that only very new people and very old animals have. Serena sat with her in the early morning light coming through Petra's kitchen window and did not let herself feel anything complicated about it. Not yet. There would be time for complicated things later. Right now there was inventory, and there were structures, and there was the very specific, very patient work of becoming something that Damien Morello had never thought to look for. He would look for her eventually, she knew that. He would have to. She was the mother of his child, and the law would require some arrangement to be formalized, and his lawyers would come eventually. She was ready for his lawyers. But there was something else she knew, something she had understood in the delivery room, or maybe earlier than that, maybe on the front steps of the Ashford Drive house, with the rain coming down and the door closed behind her. Damien would also look for the source of the pressure he was about to start feeling on his business interests. He would notice the Callaway acquisition. He would notice other things she hadn't done yet, but was going to do. He was a careful and intelligent man, and he would investigate, and he would look for patterns, and he would look for a name. He would never look for hers. Because to Damian Morello, she was still the woman he had thrown out in the rain. She was still the wife he had discarded. She was still, in the file of his mind where he kept his assessments of people, a woman who had loved him too much and had been weak enough to show it, and was now, presumably, somewhere crying about it. He had no idea who she was. She had spent 6 years making sure of that. Not consciously, not strategically. She had simply been too busy trying to survive inside a marriage to a man like Damian Morello to have much energy left over for performing power. But it had had an unintended benefit. She was invisible to him. She had always been invisible to him, even when she was standing right in front of him. It was, she thought, the most useful thing about him. She kissed the top of Leah's head. Leah slept on. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, Serena received a letter from Damian's legal team. It was formal and clean and proposed a custody arrangement that gave him visitation rights on a schedule that had been designed, she could tell, primarily to avoid inconvenience to Damian, rather than to provide meaningful presence in Leah's life. There was a financial offer attached, a settlement figure that was, in raw numbers, substantial. A woman without other resources might have been grateful for it. Serena was not grateful for it. She forwarded it to Raymond Cho and told him to respond with a counteroffer that was so complicated and so loaded with documentation requests and legal conditions that the back and forth would take at least 8 months to resolve. Not because she wanted a war, because she needed time. She needed the next 8 months to do what she was going to do, and she needed Damian's legal attention to be occupied somewhere that wasn't her actual movements. "This will make his lawyers angry," Raymond Cho said. "That's fine," she said. "Angry lawyers make mistakes." Raymond Cho built the structures. She studied everything he showed her and asked questions about the parts she didn't understand and learned things she should have learned years ago, and did not waste time being angry at herself for the years she had spent not learning them. The anger would have been accurate, but it was not useful, and she had decided, with the same deliberateness she was now bringing to everything, that she was not going to spend energy on things that were not useful. Leah grew. She got rounder, and then she got longer, and she started having opinions about faces. She would study a face with a concentration that felt, Serena thought, unsettlingly familiar, the way Serena herself studied things. Petra said the baby had her mother's eyes. Serena looked at Leah's eyes, dark and watchful, and thought, good. Let her watch. Let her see everything. By the end of the first 6 months, Serena had made 9 distinct investments, all invisible, all structured through holding companies that had no visible connection to the name Valenti. Raymond Cho had been meticulous. The paper trail was a cathedral of misdirection. 6 layers of ownership before you got to anything real. She had also hired, through a private investigative firm that Petra had vetted through 3 degrees of separation, a woman named Greta Nash who was 61 years old and looked like someone's grandmother, and had spent 22 years doing forensic financial analysis for federal investigations before going private. Greta Nash made a chart of Damian Morello's financial structure. It took her 2 months. When it was done, it covered 3 walls of the office Serena had quietly rented in a building across town under the name of one of her holding companies. Serena stood in front of those walls for a long time. She saw the pressure points. She saw the interdependencies. She saw which threads, pulled in which order, would cause which sections of the architecture to collapse. She also saw something she had not expected, a name that appeared in 3 different places in the structure, connected to 3 different financial instruments, that did not belong to anyone she recognized from Damian's circle. A name attached to an equity position in one of the Morello shell companies that had been acquiring interest quietly, from the outside, for at least 2 years. Someone else was already doing what she was doing. Someone had been watching Damian Morello from the outside and moving pieces into position. She didn't know who, not yet. She pulled her phone and called Greta Nash. "The external equity position," she said. "The one in the Dunmore Street shell. I need you to find out who's behind it." "It's going to take time," Greta said. "It's been structured very carefully." "I know," Serena said. "Someone careful put it there." She looked at the wall, at the charts, at the name she didn't recognize sitting in the middle of Damian's carefully built empire like a splinter nobody had noticed yet. "Find out everything." She hung up. She stood in the middle of that office with the afternoon light coming through the single window and the charts surrounding her on three sides, and she felt the exact shape of what she had built and what she had yet to build. And for the first time since the night on the steps, she felt something other than the cold, specific anger that had been keeping her moving. She felt ready. And somewhere across the city, in the mansion on Ashford Drive, Damian Morello was sitting at his desk going through a report from Marcus that showed a small but inexplicable shift in the Callaway Group's ownership structure. Nothing alarming, not yet, just a number that didn't quite match the number from 3 months ago. And he frowned at it, and he told Marcus to look into it, and he went back to his other business. He did not think of Serena. He would. Greta Nash found the name in 11 days. She came to the office on a Tuesday morning with a flash drive and a printed summary that she set on the desk without ceremony, the way she did everything, without announcement, without the performance of revelation that less experienced people use to make their work seem more significant. The work was significant. It didn't need theater. The equity position in the Dunmore shell belongs to a man named Victor Shade, Greta said. She sat down and crossed her ankles and folded her hands on her knee. He's not in the city. He operates out of Harwick, Port City, about 90 miles east. He runs a logistics company on paper. In practice, he controls most of the freight movement through the Harwick port, which means he controls what comes in and what goes out without anyone asking about it. Serena looked at the printed summary. Victor Shade, 63. A photograph showed a compact man with silver hair cut close to his skull and the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was its own kind of power. He's in the same business as Damian. Adjacent. They don't overlap directly. Morello runs the city, Shade runs the port corridor. But Shade has been moving into Morello's legitimate business structure for 2 years, quietly. Through fronts. Greta tapped the summary. He's not buying in because he wants a return on investment. He's buying in so he has a hand on the lever, Serena said. That's my read. Serena set the summary down. Outside the window, the city moved in its indifferent way. Traffic, pigeons, a delivery truck making a sound like something structural failing. She thought about what it meant that someone else was already positioned inside Damian's empire. She thought about what it meant for her own timeline. Does Damian know? She asked. If he does, he hasn't moved on it. The positions are buried deep enough that you'd need Greta Nash to find them. A beat. Which is why he hired me and Damian didn't. Does Shade know about me? Nobody knows about you, Greta said. You're 6 layers deep in paperwork. You're a holding company that's owned by a holding company that's managed by a trust that was established by a firm that traces back to Raymond Cho's office. And Raymond Cho's client list is not public information. She looked at Serena with the flat assessment of someone who had spent decades watching things go wrong. You're invisible. Keep it that way. Serena kept it that way. The Callaway Group acquisition completed in the 2nd month of the new year. She now owned 23% of a financial services firm that processed a significant portion of Damian Morello's legitimate revenue. Not enough to control. Enough to see. Enough that certain reports crossed through Callaway's back-office systems in ways that Raymond Cho's structures could access without alerting anyone. She read those reports at Petra's kitchen table while Leah slept, and she built a picture. What the picture showed her was that Damian Morello was not as untouchable as the city believed. The city believed in him the way cities believe in their powerful men. With a combination of fear and narrative, the story of a man who had started with nothing and had built something absolute. The story was half true, which is usually enough. He had started with little. He had built something substantial, but the thing he had built was more fragile than it looked from outside, because it was held together in certain critical places by relationships and agreements that depended entirely on his ability to project invincibility. The moment his allies believed that invincibility was compromised, those relationships would shift. She started shifting them, not visibly. The first moves were financial. Small disruptions in the Callaway revenue streams, delays in processing that could be explained as technical, portfolio adjustments that redirected certain capital flows away from Morello-adjacent vehicles without any fingerprints on the redirection. Small enough that no single incident demanded investigation. Cumulative enough that by the end of February, Walter Briggs, Damian's CFO, was looking at numbers that didn't add up the way they should and couldn't find the reason why. She knew about Briggs's confusion because Greta Nash had found a way to monitor certain of Briggs's communications. Nothing illegal, technically. Greta operated in the particular gray zone of someone who knew exactly where the lines were because she had once been responsible for drawing them. What Greta had found was that Briggs was a frightened man. He had been frightened for a long time, serving a man like Damien, and the new confusion in the numbers was making him more frightened, and frightened men talk to people they should not talk to. Briggs had started calling a man named Terrence Olin, who was a mid-level rival in a competing organization that Damien had been keeping suppressed for 3 years through a combination of financial pressure and strategic intimidation. Briggs wasn't giving Olin information, not yet. The calls were too cautious for that, the conversations too careful. But he was making contact, he was establishing a line. He was preparing for the possibility that Damien Morello's empire might not be permanent. Serena noted this in her notebook and moved on. By March, Leah was 5 months old. She had learned to laugh, a sound that Petra said was the most disproportionately loud thing she had ever heard from something that small, and she had developed a specific preference for being held facing outward so she could see everything. Serena held her that way constantly. She held her that way at the kitchen table reading Greta's reports, at the window watching the street below, in the Lakeview office in front of Greta's 3-wall chart on the days she brought Leah in because Petra had her own work and couldn't always watch her. Leah faced outward and watched and did not look away from things. It was, Serena thought, an excellent quality. She would need it. Damien's lawyers sent a second proposal in March. More aggressive than the first. Less money, more conditions, language about Serena's mental stability that someone on his legal team had added because they thought it might create leverage. She read the stability language twice and felt something cold move through her that was not quite anger and not quite contempt, but contained elements of both. She forwarded it to Raymond Cho and told him to file a response that challenged every condition and added 3 new documentation requests and extended the timeline by another 4 months. He's going to stop negotiating at some point and simply move, Raymond warned her. His legal team is not patient. I know, she said. I'm not trying to stall forever. I just need the next 4 months. For what? She looked at the chart on her wall, at the property she had identified on Meridian Boulevard, a commercial building that housed 3 Morello-linked businesses on its upper floors, and a restaurant on the ground floor that served as a meeting point for certain conversations that preferred not to happen in offices. The building had been quietly listed for potential sale through a third-party broker 2 weeks ago, which meant Damien was considering liquidating it, which meant the pressure she had been applying to his cash flow was doing something. She had already put in an offer. Through 6 layers of holding company, at a price that was attractive enough to accept and came attached to a purchase agreement that was completely clean on its face. I need the next 4 months, she said again, to finish buying the foundation out from under him. Raymond Cho was quiet for a long moment. You understand that when he figures out what's happening, he won't figure it out in the next 4 months. And after that? After that, she said, I want him to figure it out. I want to be standing right in front of him when he does. In April, the Meridian building sold. Serena owned it by the end of the month, which meant she was the landlord of 3 Morello-linked businesses whose leases were now, in a technical and entirely legal sense, hers to manage as she saw fit. She did not change anything immediately. She simply filed the transfer of ownership through the appropriate channels and waited for someone in Damien's organization to notice. It took 12 days, which was 12 days longer than she expected, which told her something about the state of Damien's attention. The call came not from Damien directly, but from Marcus Reyes. His voice, when she answered, carried the specific quality of a man who had been told to make a call he found personally uncomfortable. Mrs. Morello, he said. Ms. Valenti, she said. What can I do for you, Marcus? A pause. There seems to be some confusion about the title transfer on the Meridian property. Mr. Morello would like to... There's no confusion, she said. The sale was clean. All documentation is filed and correct. If there's a specific legal question, please direct it to my attorney, Raymond Cho. I'll forward you his contact. Serena. Marcus dropped the professional remove. He had always been careful with her, Marcus, in the particular way of men who work for dangerous people, and develop a habit of being kind to the people around those dangerous people as a kind of private accounting. This is going to make him angry. I'm sure it will, she said. Is there anything else? There was a silence. She heard Marcus breathe. He's going to come after this. I know, she said. Tell him I said hello. She hung up. She put the phone face down on the desk and pressed her palms flat on the surface and breathed, in through the nose. The same counting she had done on the steps of the Ashford Drive house in the rain, except this time it wasn't pain she was managing. It was the knowledge that she had just stepped out from behind the curtain, partially, enough to be seen, and the thing she had been building for 6 months in invisible patience was now going to accelerate whether she was ready or not. She was ready. She picked up her phone and called Petra. "I need you to take Leah for the next week, possibly 2. Petra didn't ask why. "Done. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Take her to your mother's place in the valley." A beat. "Serena." "It's precautionary," she said. "He won't. I don't think he'd touch her. She's his daughter, and even Damian Morello has lines he doesn't cross." She paused. "But I want her safe while I can't see her." "Okay," Petra said. "We leave tonight." That was Friday. By Sunday, Damian Morello had dispatched 3 different investigators to find the beneficial owner of the holding company that had purchased the Meridian building. They were good investigators. She knew who they were because Greta Nash knew who they were, and they were going to spend a long time inside a very carefully constructed maze. What they were not going to find at the end of that maze was anything connecting to Serena Valenti. What they were going to find, because she had arranged for them to find it, was a trail that led, with apparent difficulty and after significant investigative effort, to a name, a financial entity called Ashbridge Capital Group, which was real, which was registered in Delaware, and which had a managing director named Conrad Ellis, who was, in fact, an associate of Victor Shade. She had built Shade a front door, not to frame him. She had no interest in redirecting Damian's anger at someone else for her own protection. She was not building a defense. She was building a sequence. She needed Damian to look east toward Harwick, toward Shade, because Shade was real, and Shade was in fact a threat to Damian's operation, and she needed those 2 men to begin circling each other with the particular energy of men in the same business who have just discovered they've each been underestimating the other. While they circled each other, she would finish the work. The meeting she had not expected happened on a Wednesday in May. She was coming out of the Callaway Group offices. She had an official role there now, a small advisory position that gave her legitimate reason to be in the building, when a woman stepped out of a black car at the curb and said her name. Serena Valenti. She stopped. She looked. Isabella Raines was not what she had looked like sitting at Serena's kitchen island in the blue monogram shirt. She was dressed in the way of a woman who has had access to significant resources for long enough that elegance has become unconscious. A dark coat, good shoes, hair that had been managed by someone with professional skill. But there was something in her face that the coat and the shoes couldn't manage, a tightness around the eyes, a quality of watching that went beyond the ordinary awareness of a woman in a city. She was afraid of something. Serena stood on the sidewalk and said nothing. 5 minutes, Isabella said. That's all I'm asking. Serena looked at the car, at the driver, who was not a driver she recognized from Damian's operation, at Isabella's hands, which were still, but too still, the stillness of someone actively preventing movement. She did the math in roughly 4 seconds. "Coffee," she said. "There's a place on the next block. You're buying." The coffee place was small and anonymous, and they sat at a corner table, and Isabella wrapped both hands around her cup, and Serena sat across from her without touching hers and waited. "He's cutting me out," Isabella said. Serena said nothing. I don't think he knows I know yet, but I've seen the paperwork." Her jaw tightened. "He transferred the Haverford Street property last month. It was in my name. He transferred it out." "He transferred an asset out of your name without telling you," Serena said. "Yes." "You should talk to a lawyer." "I have a lawyer." Something sharp moved through Isabella's eyes. "I'm not here for legal advice." "Then what are you here for?" Isabella looked at her directly. The fear was still there, underneath, but there was something else over the top of it now. A calculation that Serena recognized because she had spent months doing exactly that kind of calculation herself. "I know you've been making moves on his businesses. I don't know how, and I don't know how much, but I know someone's been cutting into his operation, and I know it started right around the time he threw you out." The table between them was very small. Serena looked at the other woman and thought about what it would have been easy to feel. Rage, contempt, the particular poison of a woman, looking at the person who had been sleeping with her husband in her house. She found those feelings present but not dominant. The dominant thing was assessment. "That's a significant accusation," she said carefully. "I'm not accusing." Isabella leaned forward slightly. Her voice dropped. "I'm asking to be useful. To me. To whoever is doing what you're doing." She held Serena's gaze. "Because when this comes down, and it is coming down, I've been close enough to him long enough to feel it the way you feel, a building starting to shift. When it comes down, I don't want to be standing in the wrong place." Serena studied her for a long moment. She thought about what Isabella Raines had access to. She thought about what Isabella's position beside Damien for the past 18 months would have allowed her to see and hear and remember. She thought about how easy it would be to say no, to stand up and walk out, to keep this clean. She also thought about the 3 pieces of information she still needed that she had not been able to get from any of her current sources. "What did you hear about the Fenwick transaction?" she said. It was a test. Oblique enough that if Isabella didn't know what it meant, the conversation was over. Isabella's expression didn't change. "It wasn't a transaction," she said. "It was a payment to the port inspector. His name is Gaffney. Damien paid him $60,000 in cash last October to ignore a specific container that came through on the 17th. Serena picked up her coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "What was in the container?" "I don't know. I heard the name Gaffney and the number and the date because Damien took the call in the study and the door wasn't fully closed and I was in the hallway." She paused. "I wrote it down because I've been writing things down for 8 months. I have a notebook." Serena thought of her own notebook. 40 pages that had become 90. "I'm going to need to think about this," she said. "I know. If I come back to you, you tell me everything in that notebook, not selectively, everything." "Agreed. And you understand that whatever I'm doing or not doing, you are not a partner in it. You're a source. There's a difference." Isabella's mouth did something that was almost a smile and not quite. "I understand the difference." Serena stood. She left money on the table for the coffee she hadn't drunk. "I'll be in touch." She walked out onto the sidewalk and turned north and did not look back at the coffee shop and did not let herself think about the full shape of what had just happened until she had turned a corner and put half a block between herself and Isabella Raines. Then she stopped and pressed her back against a building and breathed. The thing about using someone like Isabella, someone who was afraid and calculating and had been in close quarters with the enemy, was that the information they carried was real, and the danger they represented was also real, because people who betray one person will, under sufficient pressure, betray another. You didn't let them close. You let them be useful at a distance, and you kept every wall between you intact. She was not forgetting who Isabella was. She was also not discarding what Isabella knew. She called Greta Nash from the sidewalk. "I need everything on a port inspector named Gaffney. Whatever he was paid last October, whatever he signed off on, whatever came through on a specific container on the 17th of October. All of it." "I'll get on it," Greta said. "This a new thread or connected?" "Connected," Serena said. "I think it connects Damien to Shade in a way that neither of them wants documented." A cab went past. Someone was arguing through a window above the street. The city kept not caring. "If there's a container, there's a manifest. If there's a manifest with Gaffney's name on it and a payment that traces back to Damien, then we don't just have financial irregularities. We have something a prosecutor would be interested in." Greta Nash was quiet for a moment. "You're changing the nature of this." "Yes," Serena said. "Up to now it's been financial, acquisition, leverage. This is—" "I know what it is." She watched the cab disappear around the corner. "Get me the documentation. I'll decide what to do with it." She started walking again. June was 3 weeks away. The annual gathering of the city's major investment families, a black tie event that Damien had hosted twice and attended every year since his operation went legitimate enough to require the appearance of civic presence, was scheduled for the 3rd week of June at the Alderton Hotel in its grand ballroom. Serena had attended it 3 times as Damien's wife. She knew the room, knew the guest list, knew the way the evening was structured and who stood where, and what the hierarchy of the room looked like when the money arranged itself in space. She had been thinking about that evening for 2 months. She had been thinking about it as an endpoint, as the place where the sequence she was building arrived at something public and irreversible. She had 3 weeks. She went back to the office and stood in front of Greta's chart and looked at the parts that were complete and the parts that still needed work, and she made herself see it without sentiment, without the personal weight of what it meant, just as architecture, as a structure with certain weaknesses that needed to be addressed before it could hold what she was going to put on it. The Gaffney thread was the last piece. If the documentation held, if it connected the October container to Damien's money and to Shade's logistics operation, then she didn't just have financial leverage. She had a case. She had something that could be handed to the right people and would do its own damage without requiring her to be present for it. And she had something that could be placed in front of a room full of the city's most powerful people and watched to see what it did. Her phone buzzed. Greta Nash. Text. Gaffney is talking to someone. Don't know who yet. Recommend we move faster than planned. She stared at the text. If Gaffney was talking, if something had shifted in the Harwick operation, if Shade and Damien had already made contact in ways that made Gaffney nervous, then the timeline she had built could collapse. The sequence assumed she was the one deciding when and how things moved. The sequence assumed she controlled the pace. She typed back, how much faster? Greta's response came in under a minute. Days, not weeks. Someone knows something is loose on the container. If they find Gaffney before we do, the thread disappears. Serena set the phone down. She looked at the chart. At the 3 weeks she had planned for. At the Alderton Hotel on the 3rd week of June, with its grand ballroom and its arranged hierarchies, and the room full of people who had believed, for years, in the story of Damien Morello. She did the math. She could wait and lose the thread, or she could accelerate and risk exposing herself before she was fully ready. Those were the two options. She turned them over and looked at the underside of each one, and found that one of them was actually not an option at all, because the thread was the foundation, and without the foundation, the rest of it was a performance rather than a demolition. She picked up her phone and called Raymond Cho. I need you to contact the Alderton Hotel, she said. I need to confirm my attendance at the investment gathering. Single ticket, under the name Valenti. Raymond Cho made a sound that might have been surprise suppressed into professionalism. That event is in 3 weeks. I know when it is. Damien will be there. I know that too. A pause. Serena, are you sure about the timeline? She looked at the chart, at the name she had written at the center of it 18 months ago, on a night in the delivery room when she had been 24 hours postpartum and reading trust documents and beginning to understand the full shape of what she had. Book the ticket, she said. She hung up. She stood in the office for a long moment. Then she picked up her jacket and turned off the light and went to get her daughter from Petra's mother's place in the valley, because she needed to hold Leah, and she needed to not be in the office with the chart for the next few hours. And she needed to remember precisely and clearly what she was doing all of this for. Not for the abstract satisfaction of winning, not for the performance of revenge, but for the specific fact of a small girl who faced outward and watched everything and deserved a world that was not built on the lie of a man who had looked at her mother on the steps of a house in the rain and turned away. She drove out of the city as the evening came down and the lights came on across the skyline, and somewhere behind her, in a building on the east side, Walter Briggs was on the phone with Terrence Olin, and his voice was shaking, and in a mansion on Ashford Drive, Damien Morello was looking at a report that Marcus had put on his desk. A report that listed 7 separate anomalies in his financial structure over the past 6 months. 7 small things that individually meant nothing and together meant that someone had been very carefully and very intelligently taking his empire apart from the inside. Damien stared at the report for a long time. Then he said quietly to Marcus, who was standing at the edge of the room with the stillness of a man waiting for instructions, "Find out who." The call from Greta Nash came at 11:47 on a Thursday night, and the sound of Greta's voice told Serena everything before the words did. Greta Nash did not have a voice that communicated alarm. She had spent 22 years in federal financial investigation, and she had learned, the way people in that work learn, to flatten affect until affect became unprofessional. She spoke about catastrophic things the way other people spoke about weather. So when Serena heard something underneath the flatness, a compression, a tightness in the syllables, she sat up in the dark of Petra's spare bedroom and turned on the lamp and said, "Tell me." "Gaffney is dead," Greta said. "They found him 2 hours ago. His car went into the river off the Callaway Bridge overpass. Police are calling it an accident." Serena sat with that for 3 seconds. It wasn't an accident. No, it wasn't. Greta paused. The documentation he had, the container manifest, the payment records, it's gone. His office was accessed. His home was accessed. Whatever physical copies existed are gone, and his digital files were wiped. Someone moved before us. Someone moved before us, Greta confirmed. And they moved clean. This wasn't panicked. This was planned. Serena stood up. She walked to the window and looked at the street below, dark and wet from rain that had stopped an hour ago. She pressed her free hand flat against the glass and felt the cold of it move up through her palm. She was thinking, very fast, about the sequence she had built, about which pieces of it depended on the Gaffney documentation, about how much of the foundation she had just lost. Most of it. She had just lost most of it. Who knew about Gaffney, she said. A pause that was half a second too long. Greta. Her voice went very flat. Who knew we were looking at Gaffney? I ran the inquiry through 2 intermediaries. Both of them are people I've used for years. Both of them are... I believed they were completely secure. But one of them has a connection to the Harwick operation that I did not know about when I contracted him. I found it afterward, 2 hours ago, when I was trying to trace who accessed Gaffney first. She stopped. When she started again, her voice had changed in a way that Serena had never heard from her before. Tighter. Something that in anyone else would have been shame. I missed it. It was there. And I missed it. Serena stood at the window and did not say anything for a moment. Okay, she said finally. Serena, I'm not... It's okay. We move. She pulled her hand from the glass. What do we still have? Tell me what's intact. The Callaway position, the Meridian building, the other acquisitions. Greta's voice steadied as she moved back into inventory. The financial documentation on the shell companies is still good. That's all sourced through Callaway's internal reporting, nothing that runs through Gaffney. The 7 anomalies Marcus Reyes put on Damien's desk, those exist regardless of Gaffney. But without the container documentation, we have no criminal case. Correct. Without Gaffney's records, we have financial irregularities and circumstantial connections. We don't have a prosecutable case. We don't have something I can put in front of a room and watch detonate. No. We have something that will make Damien uncomfortable. We don't have something that will take him down. Serena turned from the window. In the next room, through the wall, she could hear the small sounds of Leah sleeping. The occasional shift, the soft random vocalizations of an infant in deep unconsciousness. She focused on those sounds for a moment, the way she sometimes focused on counting when pain was large. I need 48 hours, she said. Don't contact anyone. Don't run any new inquiries. Let everything go quiet. And then? And then I'm going to figure out what we missed, she paused. And who else knew? She didn't sleep. She sat at Petra's kitchen table with her notebook and worked backward through every conversation, every contact, every person who had touched any part of what she'd built. Raymond Cho, completely trusted, professionally bound, no connection to the Morello operation or the Harwick port. Greta Nash, she had just proven fallible, but not disloyal. A mistake was not a betrayal. The 2 intermediaries Greta had used, one of them was the problem, or had been used as the problem, a gap someone had found and pushed through. And Isabella. She stopped at Isabella's name and looked at it. Isabella Rains had come to her on a sidewalk 6 weeks ago with information about Gaffney's name. Not Gaffney directly. The name, the number, the date. She had said she overheard a conversation. She had said she had a notebook. Serena thought about the coffee shop, about the way Isabella had held her cup, about the calculation in Isabella's eyes that she had assessed as fear plus self-interest, which was a combination she understood and had decided to work with rather than around. She thought about what Isabella had and hadn't said. She had given Serena the thread. She had given her the entry point that led to Gaffney. And then Serena had pulled that thread and someone had been waiting at the other end of it. She wrote a question in her notebook. Did Isabella give me Gaffney, or did Isabella give someone else the fact that I was looking for Gaffney? She stared at the question. Both things could be true simultaneously. Isabella could be genuinely afraid of Damien and genuinely interested in self-preservation and still have been turned. At some point between their coffee and Serena's call to Greta, someone could have gotten to Isabella and offered her something better than what Serena was offering. Or Isabella had never been anything other than a line that Damien ran to find out who was cutting into his operation. She had walked into a coffee shop and sat down across from her husband's mistress and taken the information the woman offered her, and she had been so certain of her own ability to use people correctly that she had not fully allowed for the possibility of being used herself. She sat with that. She did not move away from it. She made herself feel the full shape of it, the stupidity of it, the specific vanity of believing her own intelligence was sufficient protection. She felt it, and then she set it aside because she could not afford to sit in it. She picked up her phone. It was 3:40 in the morning. She called Petra. Petra answered on the third ring, immediately awake. She had always been that way, able to surface from sleep instantly without the groggy interface most people required. "What?" "I need you to take Leah somewhere else," Serena said. "Not your mother's. Somewhere nobody knows." A beat. "How bad?" "I don't know yet." She stood up from the table. "Just go. Tonight. Don't tell me where. Call me when you're there and tell me you're safe, and that's all I need." "Serena." Petra's voice went very quiet. "Are you in danger?" She thought about that honestly, about what Damien now knew or was beginning to know, about the fact that if Isabella had been a line, then Damien knew there was a sophisticated operation running against him, and he was going to spend significant resources finding the source. And when he found it, "I don't know," she said. "Go." "Going," Petra said. She was already moving. Serena could hear the sounds of a woman getting a sleeping infant out of a crib with maximum efficiency and minimum disturbance. "You call me the second something changes." "I will." She hung up. She packed a bag, efficiently, the way she had learned to move through decisions when the weight of them threatened to slow her down. Clothes, her notebook, the laptop, the prepaid phone she kept for communications. She didn't want to run through her primary number. She moved out of Petra's apartment at 4 in the morning and took a cab to a hotel 3 neighborhoods away, a mid-range business hotel where she had paid cash for 2 nights the previous month under a reason she'd half-consciously invented about liking to have options. She had not known at the time she was building a bolt hole. She understood now that some part of her had known. She was in the hotel room by 4:30. She opened the laptop and started working. The confrontation with Isabella happened the following afternoon. She arranged it herself, and she arranged it on ground she chose. Not the coffee shop, not anywhere Isabella had suggested in a follow-up message that had come in that morning asking to meet. She sent an address that was a parking garage on the west side, second level, where she had been twice before and knew the camera coverage and knew there was no point from which someone watching could position themselves without being able first. Isabella came alone. She was less composed than she had been at the coffee shop. The coat was the same quality, but she was wearing it wrong, slightly off-center, the collar uneven, the way clothes sit when they've been put on by someone whose attention was elsewhere. Serena was already there when Isabella's car came up the ramp. She watched the car park. She watched Isabella get out and look around and find her standing 15 feet away against a concrete column and start walking over. She let Isabella get within 6 feet. "Gaffney is dead," she said. Isabella stopped. "His documentation is gone," Serena continued. Her voice was exactly even. She had been working on this since 4 in the morning, and the even voice cost her nothing at this point because she had burned through all the uneven places already. Whoever accessed his files knew exactly what they were looking for, which means they knew exactly what I had asked Greta Nash to look for, which means they knew I was building a case around the container and the port inspector. She looked at Isabella without any particular expression. The only way they knew that is if someone told them after I started looking. Isabella's face went through several things in quick succession. Serena watched all of them. "I didn't," Isabella started. "Don't." Serena said it the way Damien said things he wanted to end, flat and final. "Don't explain it. Just tell me what you gave them." The parking garage was very quiet. Someone on the level above them was pulling out of a space, the tire sound grinding against concrete. A car passed on the street below. Between those sounds, Isabella's breath and Serena's, and the specific silence of a woman who had been caught being 2 things at once. "He found out I'd met with you," Isabella said finally. Her voice was different now, smaller. "I don't know how, I was careful. I was so careful, but he has people everywhere, and one of them must have, it doesn't matter. He found out. And he came to me and he told me." She stopped, started again. "He told me that he'd make sure I was in the building when the building came down unless I told him what you were looking for. And you told him." He would have destroyed me. The fear was back in her face, fully visible now, not calculated. You don't know what he does to people who— I know exactly what he does, Serena said. Her voice remained level, and she kept her hands loose at her sides, and she breathed steadily and did not let any of what was happening in her chest reach her face. I was married to him for 4 years. Isabella looked at her. I'm sorry. I don't need that. I know, but I am. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them together. He knows it's you. He doesn't have your name yet. I didn't give him your name. I gave him Gaffney because Gaffney was what he asked about. But he's going to find it. He's going to pull the thread, and he's going to find you. How long? Serena said. Days. Maybe less. Isabella's jaw tightened. He has people inside the Calloway group. Not many, not deep, but enough to pull ownership records through back channels that don't go through official filings. Serena's stomach dropped. She kept her face neutral. Who inside Calloway? A man named Dre, junior compliance officer. He's been passing information to Marcus for 6 months. Isabella looked at her steadily. I'm telling you this because it's the only thing I have left to give you that matters. Serena thought about the Calloway position, about the 23% she held through structures that went 6 layers deep, about whether Dre, in compliance, could access the beneficial ownership chain at a level that would eventually surface her name. He couldn't, not fully. But he could get to the third, and the third layer, if someone was motivated enough and smart enough, was a starting point from which the rest could be unraveled. You need to go, Serena said. Where? I don't care. Somewhere that isn't here and isn't Damien's house. She looked at Isabella. You've made yourself useless to him by telling me this. You understand what that means. Isabella understood. She could see it in the way the color left her face. Yes. Then go. Isabella went. Serena watched the car descend the ramp and disappear. She stood in the parking garage and breathed and did not allow herself the luxury of anything that wasn't immediate and practical. She called Raymond Cho. I need to restructure the Calloway position, she said. Today. Today is not today, Raymond. She started walking toward the stairs. There's a compliance officer named Dre who has been running information to Marcus Reyes. I need the beneficial ownership chain changed above the level he can access. Can you do that? Raymond Cho was silent for 4 seconds. It will be visible. The restructuring will flag internally. How fast can you move it? 6 hours? Maybe 5. 5, she said. Start now. She was in a cab heading back to the hotel when her prepaid phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Ms. Valenti. A man's voice, not Damien. Older, precise. My name is Victor Shade. I believe we have a mutual problem that's become urgent. She stared at the back of the cab driver's headrest. How did you get this number? I have people who are good at finding things, he said. Same as you. A pause. I'm not your enemy. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I have been watching your operation for 3 months with considerable admiration, and I would very much like to meet. Why? Because Damien Morello now knows he has 2 people inside his walls, and when men like Damien are cornered, they don't negotiate. They burn everything and rebuild. His voice was very steady. You've been building something careful and invisible. He's going to make it visible before you're ready, unless we talk. She thought about the chart on her office wall, about the name Victor Shade appearing in 3 places in Damien's financial structure, about the front door she had built for him in the Ashbridge shell, which he had just confirmed he'd found. Where? She said. Harwick, tomorrow morning. I'll send an address to this number. He paused. Come alone. I'll do the same. I want to emphasize, I am not trying to absorb your operation. I'm trying to survive the next 2 weeks, and I suspect you are also trying to survive the next 2 weeks. She thought about that, about what it meant to meet a man she had never spoken to, in his city, at his location, about all the ways it could go wrong. She thought about Gaffney going into the river. I'll be there at 9, she said. She arrived in Harwick at 8:40 and drove the address herself and sat outside it for 15 minutes, watching the building and the street around it before she got out of the car. The building was a shipping warehouse near the port, converted partially into offices, the kind of building that announced nothing about itself. She went in through the front entrance because she had decided that projecting caution was less useful than projecting the posture of someone who had decided to be there and was not apologizing for the decision. Victor Shade was already inside. He was exactly the photograph, compact, silver-haired, with the stillness she had noticed in the image, and which was even more present in person. He was sitting at a plain table with nothing on it except 2 paper cups of coffee, and he stood when she came in and did not offer his hand, which she appreciated because it skipped the performance of civility and went straight to the situation. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Tell me what you know," she said. She sat down. She did not touch the coffee. He sat. He folded his hands on the table. "Damian Morello contacted me 4 days ago," he said. "He believes I am the one who has been acquiring positions in his legitimate business structure. He's partly right. I have 2 positions he doesn't know about. He found a third that isn't mine." She watched him. "He found the Ashbridge entity," he said. "He traced it to a holding company that has my CFO's former law firm in its registration documents. A coincidence that your people apparently engineered." His eyes were very steady on her. "I'm not angry about it. It was smart. I simply want you to understand that I know you did it." "All right," she said. "Damian asked me to a meeting. In 3 days. Here in Harwick, at a location he specified." He paused. "When men like Damian ask you to a meeting on their terms, in your city, it's not a negotiation." "He's going to move on you," she said. "He's going to try to end me and take my port operation and eliminate the threat to his eastern corridor in one evening." Shade looked at her without any drama in it. "I have defenses. I'm not without resources. But if Damian moves against me while he's simultaneously exposing your operation in the city, we both lose in different ways, and he survives. So what are you proposing?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The event at the Alderton Hotel. 3 weeks from now. I know about it. I know you intend to use it." He looked at her steadily. "I can give you what Gaffney had." She went very still. "The container documentation," he said. "The manifest. The payment records for Gaffney. I have copies. I've had copies for 8 months, because the container that came through on October 17th was mine." He said it without flinching. "Damian paid Gaffney to pass it. The container was part of an arrangement I had with a supplier in the East. When Damian intercepted the arrangement and inserted himself as the facilitator, without my knowledge, without my agreement, I documented everything, because I knew I would need it." The warehouse was very quiet. She could hear the port sounds distantly. Machinery, water, the low persistent industry of a working harbor. "You've been holding this for 8 months, she said. "I've been waiting for the right moment and the right partner." His eyes didn't move from hers. "You are moving against him from the inside. I am positioned on the outside. Together, what we have is not just leverage, it's a complete case." She thought about 3 weeks, about the Alderton ballroom, about the documents on the giant screens that she had planned and built toward. She thought about Gaffney in the river and Leah in an unknown location with Petra and the 5 hours Raymond Cho was spending restructuring her ownership chain to stay ahead of Marcus Reyes and a compliance officer named Dre. She thought about what it meant to take what Victor Shade was offering. She thought about the cost of it, the fact that his documentation was real, but so was his involvement, and using his records made her operations hands less clean than she had built them to be. She thought about the difference between a legitimate financial case and one that required her to touch someone like Shade to complete it. She had wanted to do this without that. She was no longer going to get to do this without that. "If I use your documentation," she said carefully, "I need to know that your name can be separated from it in the presentation. I need the records to stand alone without requiring anyone to explain where they came from." "The records stand alone," he said. "They're authenticated. They don't require my name to be credible." "And what do you want in return?" He was quiet for a moment. His hands were still folded on the table. "I want to attend the Alderton event," he said. "I want to be in the room when it happens." He paused. "And I want the Dunmore Street shell, the position I have in it. I want clear title, no contest from your operation." She thought about Dunmore Street, about the shell company and what it represented in Damian's structure and what it was worth as a position. She thought about the calculus of it. "Agreed on Dunmore," she said. "The attendance I need to think about." "I understand." She stood. She looked at him across the plain table. "The documentation? I need it today. Not in 3 weeks. Today, so I can verify it and build around it." I can have it to you within the hour, he said. Good. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. And Mr. Shade, if this is a second setup, if there's someone waiting outside who's been sent here by Damien because this meeting was arranged by someone other than you, there isn't, he said. His voice was flat and clear. I am trying to survive, same as you. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded once and walked to the door. She was halfway down the block toward her car when her primary phone rang. Raymond Cho. She answered. The restructuring is done, he said. But Serena, he stopped. What? While I was in the Callaway structure, I found something. In the back office reporting channel we set up to access Damien's revenue data. He stopped again. Someone else has been using that channel, not Damien's people. Someone else has been reading the same reports we've been reading, for at least 2 months. She stopped walking. Who? I don't know yet. The access signature is masked, but whoever it is, he paused. They've seen everything we've seen. They know the full shape of what you've built. She stood on the Harwick street with the port sounds behind her and the morning sun coming in at an angle that put half the street in shadow. And she understood, with a clarity that arrived not as a thought, but as a physical sensation in the center of her chest, that the shape of the situation had just changed entirely. Someone had been watching her watch Damien. Someone had the complete map of everything she had built, and she had no idea who they were or what they intended to do with it. She found out who was watching in 46 hours. Raymond Cho called her back at 11 the following morning with a name, and the name hit her like something structural giving way. Not a collapse, not all at once, but the specific lurch of a foundation shifting under weight it was not built to bear. The name was Walter Briggs, Damien's CFO, the nervous man with the Cayman account slip, the frightened accountant who had been calling Terrence Olin for months, building a line of exit while his employer's empire developed cracks. The man Serena had noted in her inventory 18 months ago as a pressure point, someone whose fear made him exploitable, and had filed away as a resource she might eventually use. He had used her first. Briggs had found the Callaway access channel 6 weeks into her operation and had been reading her reports ever since, building his own picture of what she was doing and what she had. And he had taken that picture to Terrence Olin, who was not simply a mid-level rival in a competing organization. Olin had spent the past year consolidating the fragmented operations that Damien had been suppressing, and what Briggs had given him was the blueprint of an enemy's campaign. Every acquisition Serena had made, every thread she had pulled, every weakness in Damien's structure that she had identified and exploited. Olin had the map, the complete map, and he had been sitting on it for 2 months, waiting to see what she built, because what she was building was the most efficient possible demolition of the man he most wanted demolished, and it was cleaner to let her finish the work and then step in. He's going to move at the Alderton event, Raymond said. His voice was very controlled. Not against you directly. He's going to use your presentation, the documents, the exposure, everything you've prepared, to create the chaos he needs to move against Damien's organization in the aftermath. When Damien is publicly destroyed and his allies are dispersing, Olin absorbs the operation. Serena was sitting in the hotel room with the prepaid phone on the bed beside her and her primary phone at her ear and the laptop open in front of her, and she was looking at all of it, all the instruments of what she had built, with the particular clarity of someone who has just understood that the thing they have been building has also been building someone else's future. He's going to let me do it, she said, and then he's going to take it. Yes. Raymond paused. Serena, if you proceed with the Alderton event, you hand Olin exactly what he needs. You expose Damien, create a vacuum, and Olin fills it. The city doesn't get better. It gets Olin. And you become the woman who inadvertently handed a criminal organization to a more dangerous one. She stared at the laptop screen. What's the alternative? She said. You could stop. Withdraw. The positions you hold are legitimate. The Callaway stake, the Meridian building, the other acquisitions. You've built real financial infrastructure. You could walk away from the Alderton plan, protect what you have, and Damien keeps his empire, she said. Raymond was quiet. He keeps his empire and Olin keeps his position, and nothing changes, and in 6 months Damien's lawyers finish with the custody negotiation, and he has access to Leah. Her voice was flat. That's not an alternative, Raymond. I know, he said quietly. Then I need to think. She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. Give me 12 hours. She thought for 10. The thing she kept returning to, turning over and examining from different angles, was the shape of what Olin needed. He needed the exposure to happen publicly. He needed the room to witness Damien's fall so that the fall was undeniable and the vacuum was immediate. He needed the chaos of a public event where alliances were dissolving in real time. He did not need her specifically. He needed the event. If she didn't provide the event, he didn't have it. But if she didn't provide the event, neither did she. She called Victor Shade. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Valenti. Olin, she said. Terence Olin. What do you know about him? A pause. Shade's pauses were different from other people's pauses. They weren't uncertainty. They were selection, the considered choice of which true thing to say. He's been consolidating for 14 months. He has 8 of the 12 independent operations that Damien has been suppressing. He's structured, patient. Another pause. He approached me 6 months ago about a partnership. I declined. Why? Because he wanted access to the port corridor, and I don't share infrastructure with people I don't control. His voice was precise and without apology. He wasn't happy about it. He has the full map of my operation, she said. He's been reading my Callaway reports for 2 months. He knows every move I've planned for the Alderton event. Silence. Then, that's a significant problem. I know it's a significant problem. I'm calling you because you're the only person in this situation who has both the documentation I need and a reason to want Olin contained. She pressed the phone against her ear and looked at the hotel room wall. Plain white paint. A painting of a harbor that could have been any harbor. If Olin absorbs Damien's operation, he comes after your port corridor next. You said he wanted it, and you said no. He'll come for it either way, Shade said. The question is whether he comes for it strong or weak. Help me make him come for it weak, she said. This pause was longer. What are you proposing? She had worked out the architecture in the last 2 hours. It was not the plan she had built. It was a different plan, harder, with less control, with more variables that could break the wrong way. But it was the plan that the situation had given her, and she had stopped being interested in cleaner options 3 days ago when Gaffney went into the river. She told Shade what she needed. He was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then, the timeline. 48 hours before the Alderton event. I need everything in place before Olin makes his own move. And if it doesn't work, then we're both in a worse position than we are now, she said. But we're already in a bad position. I'd rather have a bad position I've chosen than one I fell into. Another pause. All right, he said. I'll make the calls. The next 11 days were the most controlled and most dangerous thing she had ever done. She restructured the Alderton presentation entirely, working 18-hour days in the hotel room with Raymond Cho on the phone and Greta Nash cycling through the office and Shade's documentation arriving in authenticated packages through a courier service that Shade specified. She built the new structure from the ground up, same destination, completely different architecture, with multiple redundancies and 2 layers that Olin's version of her map could not have anticipated because she had built them after he stopped watching. She also, for the first time since the parking garage with Isabella, made direct contact with someone she had never planned to contact. Damien's lead attorney was a woman named Catherine Voss, who had represented the Morello organization for 9 years, and who had, in those 9 years, developed the particular relationship with the law that very good attorneys in certain practices develop: the ability to operate entirely within its letter while understanding precisely how elastic its spirit could be. Serena had interacted with Voss 3 times during the custody negotiation. She had assessed her as formidably capable and personally amoral in the specific professional sense of someone who serves whoever is paying. She called Voss from the prepaid phone on a Sunday morning. Ms. Voss, she said, this is Serena Valenti. Before you say anything, I'm not calling about the custody negotiation. I'm calling to give you information that is relevant to your professional situation, not your client's situation, yours. A pause. I'm listening, Voss said carefully. Your client is about to be publicly exposed at the Alderton event in 12 days, Serena said. The exposure includes documentation of financial crimes that carry federal sentencing guidelines. In the aftermath, Terence Olin moves on the organization. Olin doesn't keep existing counsel. He has his own legal infrastructure. You lose the Morello account either way. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. I'm calling because there is a version of what happens at the Alderton event that results in a negotiated outcome rather than a public demolition. That version requires Damien to understand, before the event, that the negotiated outcome is available to him. I can't tell him myself. You can. You want me to broker a communication between you and my own client. Boss's voice was extraordinarily neutral. I want you to tell your client that the woman he threw out of his house has been the one cutting into his operation for 18 months, and that she is prepared to offer him a choice between two outcomes, and that he has until 48 hours before the Alderton event to contact Raymond Cho's office to initiate that conversation. She paused. The choice I'm offering is real. I'm not setting a trap. I genuinely want him to take the negotiated path. Why? Voss said. Because my daughter doesn't need her father in federal prison, Serena said. She needs him diminished, controlled, and legally bound. That's a different outcome from destroyed, and it's the one I'm willing to build if he cooperates. Voss was quiet for a long moment. I'll pass the message, she said. I make no representation about his response. I know, Serena said. Thank you. She hung up and sat with the prepaid phone in her hand and breathed. The call from Marcus Reyes came 36 hours later. Not from Damien directly. That was Damien's answer in itself. The use of an intermediary. The refusal to come to the phone himself because coming to the phone was an acknowledgement of equivalence. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral in the way of a man who had received very specific instructions about tone. Mr. Morello would like to meet, Marcus said. Neutral location, Serena said. My choice, within 24 hours. A pause. Agreed. She chose a restaurant in the financial district, a place with glass walls and high visibility and no back rooms, the kind of environment that made certain kinds of behavior structurally inconvenient. She arrived 15 minutes early and sat facing the door and ordered water and did not look at the menu. Damien walked in at exactly the agreed time, which told her he had been there before her somewhere, watching the entrance. He was alone except for Marcus, who came as far as the door and stayed there. He crossed the restaurant floor without looking at anything except her, and he sat down across from her, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. He looked different, not dramatically, not the way people look in movies when circumstances have aged them visibly, but there were specific things. The line of his jaw was tighter. There were marks under his eyes that hadn't been there 18 months ago. He was wearing the armor of a very well-dressed man, but the armor had a quality of being worn slightly differently than it used to be, the way a familiar weight becomes unfamiliar when you've been carrying it too long. He looked at her. She looked at him. It was you, he said. Not a question. Yes. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. She watched the specific thing that moved through his face. Not surprise. He was past surprise, but something more complicated. The recalibration of a man who has had to revise a foundational assumption. The Callaway position. Among others, the Meridian building. Mine, she said. You've been paying me rent for 8 months through your Meridian tenants. Something moved in his jaw. A muscle tightening. The 7 anomalies Marcus flagged. All me. The 8th one he hasn't found yet is also me. She picked up her water glass, set it down without drinking. I'm not here to catalog it, Damien. You know the shape of it. I know you've been very careful, he said. His voice was under control. Extremely under control, the way water is controlled by a dam, by the structure holding against pressure. I know you've been building something for 18 months that I missed entirely. He paused. I didn't think you were capable of it. I know. No, she said. That's why it worked. The muscle in his jaw moved again. What do you want? I want you to know about Terrence Olin, she said. Before anything else, I want you to know that Olin has had the complete map of my operation for 2 months, and he's planning to use the Alderton event as his moment to move on your organization. He doesn't care about the exposure. He wants the vacuum. Damien stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes. The calculation moving very fast. The pattern matching of a man who had survived this long by reading situations faster than the situations developed. Olin. He had access to everything I built. He knows every move I planned. He's been waiting for me to do the work and planning to walk through the door I opened. She looked at Damien steadily. I'm telling you this not to protect you. I'm telling you because if Olin takes your operation, my daughter grows up with that instead of you. And Olin is worse. He was very still. You're warning me. I'm giving you information that serves both of us, she said. Don't make it sentimental. His eyes were on her face with an intensity she remembered from 6 years ago and that she had once misread as a form of attention that was also care. She didn't misread it now. It was pure assessment. He was looking at her the way he looked at every variable he encountered, measuring it, weighing it, deciding what it was worth. What are you offering? He said. Negotiated outcome, she said. You come to the Alderton event. You sit in that room. When the documentation goes up on the screens, because it goes up, that's not negotiable. That happens. You don't fight it. You acknowledge the restructuring that's already happened. Your legitimate businesses, the ones I now have positions in, formally transition to a structure that I control in partnership with your holding company. You retain income. You lose control. She paused. In exchange, the criminal documentation stays out of prosecutorial hands. You get diminishment, not federal charges. He looked at her for a long time. The restaurant moved around them. Waitstaff, the sound of other conversations, the low clink of glassware. None of it touched the table where they were sitting. And Olin, he said. I handle Olin, she said. That's not your problem to solve. How? Not your problem, she said again, flat, final. He absorbed that. She watched him run the math, watched the calculation move through him, the variables settling into an order she couldn't see but could feel in the quality of his attention. She had spent 6 years learning to read the quality of Damian Morello's attention. She was reading it now, and she was finding something she had not prepared herself to find. He was scared. Not the way ordinary men were scared. The fear in Damian Morello was a structural thing, deep in the foundation, invisible except in very specific moments. But it was there. She could see it in the controlled stillness of his hands on the table, and in the way his eyes had stopped moving the way they usually moved, always cataloging exits, always marking threats, and had become fixed, focused inward. He was looking at the end of the thing he had built, and he was afraid of the end of it. She had expected to feel something about that, some version of satisfaction or vindication, or the particular warmth of being proven right. She felt none of those things. She felt tired, which surprised her, bone-tired in a way that had been accumulating for 18 months, and that she had been refusing to acknowledge because acknowledgement would have made it harder to keep moving. I need time, he said. You have until 6 p.m. tomorrow, she said. After that I proceed as planned, and Olin proceeds as planned, and we both lose in different ways. She stood. She picked up her coat. She looked at him one last time. This man she had loved. This man who had made her stand in the rain. This man who had looked at his pregnant wife and chosen the easier, more elegant option and had called that choice good judgment. Make the right decision, Damian, not for me, for the version of your life that still exists after this. She walked out. Marcus Reyes held the door for her. She didn't thank him. She walked to the car she had parked around the block and got in and drove 2 blocks and then pulled to the curb and put the car in park and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. Hard and ragged, the ugly breathing of someone who has held themselves together for a long time and has for a moment run out of capacity for it. She breathed. She counted. She got to 10. She picked her head up. She put the car in drive. Damian's answer came at 5:53 the following evening, through Catherine Voss, delivered in 7 words. He agrees to the terms. See you there. 7 words. After 6 years of marriage and 18 months of war. 7 words delivered through his lawyer, which was exactly right, which was exactly Damian, converting everything, even surrender, into a professional transaction. She read the message 3 times. Then she called Petra. How is she? She said. She's perfect, Petra said. She said her first clear word today. Not mama, because that would be too easy. She said more. A pause. Appropriate, right? Serena almost laughed. Almost. I need 2 more days, she said. Then come home. 2 days, Petra confirmed. We'll be there. She hung up. She was in the hotel room with the laptop open and Shade's documentation loaded and Raymond Cho's restructuring files arranged in the order they would be presented and 12 days of preparation compressed into the 36 hours remaining before the Alderton event. She needed to handle Olin. She needed to handle what Olin knew and what Olin was planning, and she needed to do it in a way that didn't require Damien's help because she had promised him she would handle it, and she did not intend to make promises she didn't keep. She called Greta Nash. Olin's access to the Callaway channel, she said. It's still active. Yes, Greta said. We locked it from our end, but the original breach point is still open. If he's watching a dead feed, but he doesn't know it's dead. Good, Serena said. I want you to put something in the feed, something that looks like a last-minute change to the Alderton presentation. Make it look like the documentation I'm presenting has been altered, like I'm pulling the criminal records and presenting only the financial restructuring. Make it look like I've made a deal. Greta was quiet. You want Olin to think you've gone soft, that the event isn't going to give him what he needs. I want Olin to believe the vacuum he's been waiting for is not going to happen, Serena said. If he believes the Alderton event is a financial announcement rather than a demolition, he changes his timing. He doesn't move that night. He waits for a better moment. And his better moment never comes, Greta said slowly, because the event is not what he thinks it is. Right. And after the event, when he understands what actually happened, after the event, he's already lost the window, Serena said. The restructuring is done. The documentation is public. Damien's organization is formally transitioned. There's nothing left for Olin to absorb because the structure that existed doesn't exist anymore. She paused. He'll come after me eventually. I know that. But by then I'll have different resources and a different position, and I'll handle it then. This is a very narrow margin, Greta said. Yes, she said. Put the false feed in. Tonight. Greta put it in. The night before the Alderton event, Serena's phone rang at 11:40. Not the prepaid phone. Her primary. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer, and then something in the back of her mind, a pattern she couldn't name, made her pick up. Ms. Valenti. A woman's voice, precise and cold in a way that was different from Voss's professional neutrality. This was a colder thing. My name is Agent Diana Cho, Financial Crimes. I think you know why I'm calling. She sat very still on the hotel bed. We've been watching the Morello operation for 2 years, the agent said. We've also been watching your operation for 7 months. We know what you've built, and we know what you have, and we know what you're planning for tomorrow night. A pause. I'm not calling to arrest you, Ms. Valenti. I'm calling because tomorrow night is also our night. And if we're both moving on the same target at the same time without coordinating, one of us is going to destroy the other's case. Serena stared at the wall of the hotel room. The harbor painting. Any harbor. What do you want? She said. A conversation, the agent said. Tonight, before tomorrow changes everything. And Serena Valenti, who had spent 18 months building something that was supposed to be entirely hers, picked up her coat and her keys and walked out of the hotel room into the night to have one more conversation that she had not planned for and could not refuse, because the alternative was arriving at the Alderton Hotel tomorrow evening with a federal investigation running through the same room she had spent 18 months preparing to walk into. Agent Diana Cho was 44 years old and had the specific posture of someone who had spent 2 decades being underestimated in rooms full of people who confused composure with passivity. She was waiting in the lobby of a building 3 blocks from the hotel, not her office, not anywhere official, which told Serena something. And she stood when Serena came through the door and did not offer a handshake and did not smile, which Serena respected immediately. They sat in a small conference room on the building's 2nd floor. No recording equipment visible. Cho had a folder on the table but kept it closed. How long have you known it was me? Serena said. 7 months, Cho said. We found the Callaway access channel from our end. We'd been monitoring Morello's revenue reporting, and we noticed a second observer in the same data stream. She looked at Serena without judgment and without warmth, the look of a professional who has decided to be honest because honesty is the most efficient path. We ran the ownership chain backward. It took us 3 months to get to the Valenti Trust. When we did, she paused. We made a decision to watch rather than act. What you were building was going to be useful. You used me, Serena said. We let you work, Cho said. There's a difference. You weren't acting under our direction. You weren't compromised. Everything you built independently. That's important for what comes next. What comes next, Serena said. Cho opened the folder. She turned it and slid it across the table. Inside were documents. Serena recognized some of them, recognized the structure of them, and understood within 3 seconds that what she was looking at was the federal case that had been building in parallel to everything she had been doing. It was substantial. It went deeper than Gaffney, deeper than the container, into the full architecture of the Morello operation across 9 years. "We have a case," Cho said. "We've had a case for 4 months. What we don't have is the financial layer, the legitimate business structure, and the shell company network, the way the criminal revenue moves through the clean side. That's the part we can't fully document from outside." She looked at Serena. "You have it." Serena looked at the documents in the folder. She thought about what she was being asked. She thought about the deal she had made with Damien, his agreement to the negotiated outcome, his 7-word message through Catherine Voss. She thought about what cooperating with a federal case meant for that agreement and what it meant for the specific promise she had made, implicitly, when she said the criminal documentation would stay out of prosecutorial hands. "I made a commitment," she said. "To Damien Morello," Cho said. "Flat. Not cruel. Just precise." "To the father of my daughter," Serena said. "About the shape of his future." Cho looked at her for a moment. Then she leaned back slightly, and the professional neutrality shifted into something that wasn't quite softness, but was adjacent to it. The look of a woman who has had to think about complicated things for a long time and has not stopped finding them complicated. "What did you offer him?" "Diminishment. Income without control. The legitimate businesses transition to a structure I manage. In exchange, the criminal records stay private." And he agreed. 7 words through his lawyer yesterday evening. Cho absorbed that. She pressed her fingertips together on the table. "Here's what I need you to understand," she said carefully. "The criminal records you have, Shade's documentation, the Gaffney payment chain, those are parallel to our case, not foundational to it. We can proceed without them. What I'm asking for is the financial mapping, the shell network, the revenue flow documentation you built through Callaway." She paused. "That's not criminal documentation. That's financial architecture. It doesn't violate what you told him." Serena looked at the folder. She thought about the line between what she had promised and what Cho was asking for. She pulled it apart carefully, the way she had learned to pull things apart, without sentiment, looking at what was actually there rather than what the shape of it suggested. The criminal records stayed with her. The financial mapping was already, technically, in Callaway's reporting systems, in documents that existed independently of Serena's promises. What Cho wanted was the organized version of what was already discoverable. "If I give you the financial mapping," she said slowly, "and your case proceeds on its own track, what happens to the Alderton event?" "The Alderton event happens," Cho said. "We're not stopping it. Your presentation, your restructuring announcement, all of it proceeds. The federal case runs separately and doesn't surface publicly until after the restructuring is legally complete." She met Serena's eyes. "You get your night. We get our case." "And Olin?" Cho's expression shifted, just slightly. "Olin is also on our radar, has been for 8 months. Your false feed, yes, we know about the false feed, buys you 1 night, but Olin is not a long-term problem. You can manage alone. He's a long-term problem you manage with the right institutional backing." She paused. "Which is something we can discuss after tomorrow." Serena sat with it, all of it. The full weight of what had been built and what was being asked and what it cost and what it bought. She was very tired. She had been very tired for 2 weeks and she had been refusing to feel it. And now, at 11:50 in the evening before the last day of the longest 18 months of her life, in a conference room with a federal agent who had been watching her work and had decided she was useful, she felt the tiredness all the way down. She thought about Leah, about the word Petra had told her, more, said with the focused certainty of a child who knows what she wants and has not yet learned to doubt whether wanting is permitted. She thought about what kind of world she was building for that child, not the abstract world of legacy and inheritance, but the actual world, the specific texture of it, what it would ask of Leah, what it would require her to navigate. She reached across the table and took the folder. "I'll have Raymond Cho send you the financial mapping by 6 a.m., she said. "Organized and annotated, everything." Cho nodded once. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Serena said. She stood. "Just make sure the case is as strong as you say it is." She walked out into the city night and drove back to the hotel and did not sleep and did not try to sleep. and instead sat at the laptop and worked until the light changed outside and the city made the specific sounds of a morning beginning. And at 5:47 a.m., she sent Raymond Cho the instruction, and at 6:03 the annotated financial mapping was in transit to Agent Diana Cho's secure channel. She closed the laptop. She showered. She dressed. The dress was dark green. She had chosen it 3 weeks ago, before any of the complications of the last 3 weeks, and the choice still felt right. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was the color of something alive and persistent. She put it on and looked at herself in the mirror of the hotel bathroom for a long moment. The woman looking back was 33 years old. She had dark circles she'd stopped trying to conceal. Her hands were steady. She looked like someone who had come through something. She didn't try to look like someone who hadn't. The Alderton Hotel's grand ballroom held 400 people on a formal evening, and by 8:15 it held 372 of them. The architecture of the city's legitimate money arranged in its familiar hierarchies. The tables organized in the specific way that these events always organized them. Proximity to the center communicating everything about where you stood in the order of things. Serena had attended this event 3 times as Damien's wife, and had sat at the third table from the center on the left side, which was where the wives of significant men sat when their husbands were at the center. She entered alone. She entered as a registered attendee to the ticket Raymond Cho had booked in her name, the name Valenti on the guest list, and the moment she walked through the ballroom doors, she felt the room register her. Not loudly, not with the dramatic hush of certain kinds of fiction, but the specific way a room registers the presence of something it wasn't fully expecting, a ripple, a recalibration, the subtle reorientation of peripheral attention. She saw Damien immediately. He was at the center table, which was where he always was at this event, because he had worked for years to be at that table, and because even now, even knowing what was coming, he was not a man who expressed vulnerability through absence. He was in a dark suit, and he was talking to the man on his left, and he looked from a distance like exactly what he had always presented himself as. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. She watched his face do the thing it did, the micro-adjustment, the resettling, the active choice of expression. He looked at her for 2 seconds and then looked back at the man on his left and continued the conversation. She found her table. She was at the 4th from the center on the right, which meant nothing about power and everything about intention. She had specifically requested a table that was off-axis to the main screen because she wanted to be watching the room's face when the documents appeared rather than the documents themselves. Victor Shade was at a table near the east wall. He caught her eye once, across the room, and gave her nothing. No nod, no acknowledgement. Good. They were strangers in this room. That was correct. She looked for Olin and found him at a table near the back, which was where a man who had been attending this event for less than 2 years would be placed, and which was, she thought, appropriate. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who believed tonight was going to give him what he'd been waiting for. The false feed had done its work. Isabella was not present. Serena had not expected her to be. The evening moved through its formal motions. Dinner, the opening remarks from the event's host, the careful choreography of an occasion that understood its own importance. Serena ate very little. She drank water. She watched the room and felt her heart doing something specific in her chest. Not racing, not the adrenaline percussion of panic, but something more measured. A heightened steadiness. The feeling of a mechanism that has been built for a purpose and is now at the moment of that purpose. At 9:40, Raymond Cho, who was sitting 2 tables away with his hands folded and his expression professionally neutral, gave her the smallest possible nod. The presentation system was ready. She stood. The room's attention shifted toward her the way attention shifts toward anything unexpected in a formal setting, with the particular alertness of people who are accustomed to controlling their environment and have registered something outside the program. The host, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had been chairing this event for 11 years, looked at her from the front of the room with an expression that was trying very hard to be politely inquiring. "I apologize for the interruption," she said. Her voice carried without effort. She had learned in 4 years of Damien's world how to fill a room without raising it. "I'm Serena Valenti. Some of you know me as Serena Morello, which is a name I no longer use. I have a brief presentation that's relevant to several business relationships in this room, and I appreciate your attention." Gerald Fitch began to say something. Raymond Cho, from his table, produced a document and held it up with the quiet efficiency of a man who has anticipated this moment and prepared for it. The document was a letter from the Alderton Hotel's management confirming that the Valenti Group had reserved presentation time as a co-sponsor of the evening, filed 6 weeks ago, entirely legitimate. Fitch looked at the document. He looked at Serena. He sat down. She pressed the button on the small remote in her hand. The screens, 3 of them, positioned around the ballroom so that no table lacked a clear view, came to life. What appeared was not a dramatic revelation. It was not designed to be. She had specifically chosen not to build it as a performance because this room was full of people who were allergic to performance and trusted architecture. What appeared on the screens was architecture, the clean, documented structure of the Morello organization's legitimate business holdings, annotated with ownership transitions, acquisition dates, and current controlling interest percentages. The current controlling interest in 23 of the 41 entities on the chart was held by the Valenti Group. She didn't say anything for a moment. She let the room read. These were people who understood what they were looking at, and she respected that. Over the past 18 months, she said, the Valenti Group has acquired controlling or significant minority positions in the legitimate business infrastructure of the Morello organization through a series of clean, documented market transactions. The full acquisition record is available through Raymond Cho's office to any party that wishes to review it. She paused. This is not a hostile action. This is a completed restructuring. The room was very quiet, the particular quiet of people who are recalibrating. She moved to the next slide. In addition to the business restructuring, the Valenti Group is prepared to release documentation regarding certain financial irregularities in the Morello organization's historical operations to the appropriate regulatory bodies. She had chosen the word irregularities deliberately, precise, not inflammatory. These materials have been prepared in cooperation with relevant authorities and will be handled through appropriate legal channels. She did not put Shade's criminal documentation on the screens. She had made a promise about criminal records, and she kept it. What she put on the screens was the financial mapping, the shell network, the revenue flows, which was, as Cho had said, financial architecture. It was damning as architecture. It didn't need to be more than that. She looked at Damien. He was looking at the screens. His face was controlled in the way that only a man with enormous practice at controlling his face can be controlled in a moment like this. But his hands, on the table in front of him, were very still, and the stillness of them was different from the stillness he usually carried. It was the stillness of someone who has accepted something. He did not stand up. He did not speak. He did not make the mistake of trying to perform his way through this room. He sat, and he looked at the screens, and he let it happen. She had not expected to feel what she felt in that moment. She had expected satisfaction, the clean, specific satisfaction of something completed. What she felt instead was something closer to grief, which surprised her and which she understood, a beat later, as accurate. Not grief for Damien, grief for the 6 years she had spent believing in a version of him that had never existed outside of her own construction of it. Grief for the woman who had stood in the rain on the steps of a house she had made into a home and pressed her hands against her stomach and counted and tried to hold herself together while the door stayed shut. She let herself feel it for exactly the length of time it took to breathe in and out once. Then she set it down. "Thank you," she said to the room. She clicked off the remote. She sat down. The room exhaled. Then it did what rooms full of powerful people do when the ground shifts. It began the rapid, invisible process of adjustment. She watched it happen across the space of the next 20 minutes. The leaning in between seats, the phones appearing under tables, the careful recalibration of who looked at whom and with what expression. 3 men who had been Damien's closest allies in this room got up from their tables within 10 minutes of each other and did not come back. Victor Shade left quietly, without looking at her, at 9:58. Olin sat at his table near the back with an expression she could read from 40 feet away, as a man absorbing the information that the night had not given him what he expected. The false feed had worked. He had come to this event expecting a financial announcement, not a demolition, and what had happened was both and more than both. And the window he had been building toward for 2 months had just closed in front of him with a sound he could not have anticipated. She watched him understand it. She watched the calculation run across his face and arrive at its conclusions. He was a careful man and a patient one, and the look on his face was not the look of someone broken, but of someone who had just been told the game had changed and was already, methodically, beginning to think about the next iteration. She would need to deal with Olin. Cho had been right about that. But not tonight, and not alone, and on terms that were now fundamentally different from what they would have been if tonight had gone a different way. He met her eyes across the room. She held the look without expression for 3 seconds. Then she looked away first, because looking away first was the correct move. Not retreat, not submission, but the signal of a person who has already moved on to the next thing and doesn't need the moment to be theatrical. Damien came to her table at 10:20. He came alone, which cost him something in this room, the visibility of it, the public nature of walking across a ballroom floor toward the woman who had just dismantled your organization in front of 370 people. He sat down in the empty chair across from her without asking, and she did not tell him he couldn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Catherine Voss will contact Raymond Cho on Monday," he said. His voice was low and entirely even. "To formalize the transfer terms." "Good," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "The criminal documentation." "Handled separately," she said. "Not by me, that's all I can tell you." He absorbed that. He had to have known it was possible, that the financial mapping she had revealed tonight would draw institutional attention that had nothing to do with her intentions or her promises. He had to have known. He was not a man who failed to understand the consequences of his own architecture. "My lawyers will want—" "Talk to Raymond," she said. "On Monday. Tonight is done, Damien." He looked at her. She looked at him. 6 years, 18 months. A child sleeping somewhere in the valley with her aunt, while her mother finished the longest night of her life. All of it sat between them at the table, and none of it needed to be said, and both of them knew it. "She's well?" he said. Quiet. The first time he had asked. Something moved in Serena's chest. She kept her face still. "She's perfect," she said. "She's coming home tomorrow." He nodded once. He stood. He straightened his jacket with the automatic gesture of a man reassembling his presentation, and he walked back across the ballroom floor toward his table, where he would spend the rest of the evening doing what powerful men do in the aftermath of their own diminishment, projecting the performance of someone whose diminishment is temporary, even when they know it isn't. She watched him go. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the specific weight of a thing completed, which is different from triumph and heavier and more lasting. Agent Cho called at 11:30 while Serena was in a cab back to the hotel. "It went well," Cho said. Not a question. "It went?" Serena said. "The financial mapping hit our systems at 6 a.m., Cho said. "We'll be ready to move within 30 days. Before then, I need one meeting, you, me, and Raymond Cho, to formalize the cooperation agreement. Wednesday," Serena said. "Raymond will send you the address." "Wednesday," Cho confirmed. A pause. "You did good work, Ms. Valenti." "I did necessary work," Serena said. "There's a difference." Cho was quiet for a beat. "Yes," she said. "There is." And something in her voice, for the first time in their brief and consequential relationship, carried something that wasn't strictly professional. The acknowledgement of one woman to another who has paid a specific and non-transferable price for something. "Get some sleep." Serena hung up. The cab moved through the city, and the city was dark and full of its own indifferent business. And she looked out the window at it and felt the thing she had been refusing to feel for 18 months begin, very slowly and with great difficulty, to release its grip. She picked up her phone and called Petra. "You're done?" Petra said. She was awake, which meant she had been awake, waiting. "I'm done," Serena said. A long exhale. "Come get your daughter," Petra said. "She's been awake for an hour. She's got your schedule." "I'm coming," she said. "In the morning, first thing." She went back to the hotel and she packed, which took 12 minutes because she had always traveled light, and because the hotel room had never been anything more than a functional necessity. It contained no version of her life, only the instruments of a particular task that was now complete. She put the notebooks in her bag. The laptop. The prepaid phone she would throw away tomorrow. She looked around the room, the plain walls, the harbor painting, any harbor, and felt nothing for it, which was right, because it deserved nothing. She slept for 5 hours. Real sleep without inventory, without the turning over of variables that had replaced sleep for the better part of a year. She slept the way people sleep when the thing they have been holding is finally set down somewhere solid enough to hold it without them. She woke at 6 and drove to the valley. Petra's mother lived in a house with a large garden that was slightly chaotic and entirely intentional, the kind of garden that knows what it's doing and doesn't need approval for it. The morning was clear and cool and smelled of something green and recent, the aftermath of irrigation or dew or both. And Serena pulled into the driveway and got out of the car, and Petra was already at the door with Leah on her hip, and Leah was wearing a yellow shirt that had a small bird on the pocket, and she was looking at Serena with the watchful dark eyes that Petra had always said were her mother's eyes. Serena crossed the driveway and took her daughter. Leah grabbed a fistful of Serena's hair, which was her standard greeting, and made a sound that was commentary and possibly judgment and definitely love in the way that very small people love, without condition or context or the complicated machinery of earned trust, just the immediate animal certainty of recognition. You. This one. Here. Serena pressed her face against the top of Leah's head and breathed her in and stood in the garden in the morning and did not say anything for a long time. Petra stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression doing the thing it did when she was trying not to cry and was mostly succeeding. "So," she said finally. "It's over." "It's over," Serena said into Leah's hair. Then she lifted her head. "The formal part. The rest takes time." "The rest always takes time," Petra said. "Yes." She looked at her cousin, this woman who had come in 11 minutes in the rain, who had held her hand through 9 hours of labor, who had taken a child to an undisclosed location on 2 hours' notice without asking questions, who had been, through all of it, the single most constant and uncomplicated good thing in Serena's life. "Thank you." Petra made a sound that dismissed the thanks as insufficient for the weight being put on it, which was correct, and then said, "Come inside. There's coffee." Serena came inside. She sat at Petra's mother's kitchen table with Leah on her knee and a cup of coffee in her hand, and the morning light coming through the window above the sink and the sound of the garden outside. And she did not think about the Alderton ballroom or the screens or Damien's hands on the table or Olin's face recalibrating in the back of the room. She thought about the coffee, which was strong, and about Leah, who was pulling at the collar of her dress with focused curiosity, and about what the next year would look like. Not the strategy of it, not yet, but the texture. An office that wasn't a hotel room. An apartment that was hers. Leah starting to walk, which Petra's mother had informed her was imminent, and which she intended to be present for. The formal case against the Morello organization moved through its institutional channels over the following months, and it moved without Serena's visible participation in it because her cooperation agreement with Agent Cho was structured precisely to keep her out of the procedural line of sight. The financial mapping did its work without her attached to it. Raymond Cho managed the cooperation process with his customary meticulous absence of drama. Damien entered a negotiated agreement with federal prosecutors in the 4th month. The terms were what they were. He retained his freedom, he paid substantial penalties, and he formally surrendered operational control of every legitimate business entity that had been in the Morello portfolio. The criminal case that had been building for 2 years resulted in charges against 7 members of his organization, none of which required Serena's testimony, because the financial documentation was sufficient and because Cho had built the case to be self-sustaining. He was not put in prison. Serena had known he might not be, had made her peace with that reality, had decided, over several nights in the early months, that the version of justice available in the world they actually lived in was imperfect and required a pragmatic acceptance that was not the same as forgiveness and not the same as surrender. He was diminished, controlled, legally bound. Watching from a reduced position while the organization his name had built was managed by people who answered, ultimately, to a structure that bore the name Valenti. He had access to Leah on the custody schedule that Raymond Cho finalized in the 6th month. He showed up. That too was something she had made her peace with. The man he was to Leah was not the same man he had been to her, and she was not willing to carry the weight of making them the same, because Leah deserved the chance to form her own conclusions about her father, and Serena was not going to make that choice for her. She moved into an apartment on the north side of the city. Real furniture. A kitchen she cooked in. a room for Leah with the window that caught the morning light. Greta Nash came on as a permanent member of the Valenti Group's analytical staff and didn't change the way she communicated about things, which was fine, because Serena didn't need warmth from Greta Nash, she needed accuracy, and accuracy was what she got. Olin remained a variable. She handled him the way Cho had suggested, with institutional backing, with the specific leverage of information that made confrontation less attractive to him than the alternatives. With a patience that she had learned over 18 months was one of her strongest instruments. He did not move against her. He recalculated and found other avenues. She watched him recalculate and kept watching. The acquisition of the Ashford Drive property happened in the 14th month. It was not dramatic. It was a real estate transaction, clean and documented, processed through the Valenti Group's property division, the transfer of ownership handled by 2 lawyers and a title company, and generating no public notice. The Morello organization had listed the property as part of the asset liquidation required by the federal agreement, and the Valenti Group had submitted an offer, and the offer had been accepted, and that was the whole of it. She went to the property on a Thursday afternoon in November. Alone. She had told Petra she was running an errand, and Petra had looked at her in the particular way that meant she knew exactly what the errand was, and had decided not to comment. She parked in the circular driveway and sat in the car for a moment. The house looked the same from outside. The hedges had been maintained. The iron fence was the same. The stone steps where she had crouched in the rain with both hands on her stomach were the same stone, the same pale gray, the same slight unevenness in the third step from the bottom that she had always meant to have fixed and had never gotten around to. She got out of the car. She walked up the steps. She had a key. The property company had given her a key. And she put it in the door, and the door opened, and she stood on the threshold and looked into the house. It was empty. The furniture had been cleared out as part of the sale. The chandelier she had argued for was still there, hanging in the foyer, because it was a fixture and came with the property. And she looked up at it, the weight and permanence of it, the thing she had fought for in a catalog argument with an interior designer years ago, and found it was still exactly what she had wanted. She had been right about that. She walked through the rooms slowly. The kitchen, the main sitting room, the study where Damien had stood with his whiskey glass and told her the situation had changed in terms that treated her like a subsidiary. The room absorbed her footsteps in the particular way of empty spaces, amplified and then lonely, the echo of something that had been present and was now absent. She was not sentimental about the house. She did not feel the pull of memory as a kind of longing. What she felt, walking through the rooms, was more like accounting, the clear-eyed inventory of a woman who is checking the final figures before closing a set of books. She had been here. She had made this place into something. It had been taken from her, and she had taken it back, and now it was hers, and she was looking at it without the weight of what it had meant when she was inside it before. She stood at the window in the main room that looked out over the back garden. The garden was overgrown slightly, the formal hedges beginning to lose their precision. She thought she would let them go further. She thought she would let something wilder take over, something that didn't need to be held in a specific shape. She took out her phone and called Petra. "Come get Leah later today," she said, "and bring her here. I want to show her the garden." A pause. "You bought it." "I did." A longer pause. "Are you okay?" She looked at the garden, at the afternoon light coming through the unwashed windows, at the chandelier reflection in the glass. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." She meant it, which surprised her, which meant it was true. "Come at 4. She can run in the garden before it gets dark." "She'll eat the plants," Petra said. "Let her," Serena said. "She should know what things taste like." She hung up. She stood at the window for another moment, and then she walked back through the house to the front door and out onto the steps and down to the driveway. And she did not look back at the door when it closed behind her. She stood in the November afternoon and breathed the cold air and felt it move through her. The clean, uninstructed fact of breathing, the simple ongoing persistence of a body that had been in the rain on these steps 2 years ago and had kept going, not because of certainty, not because of plan, but because it did not know how to do otherwise. She got in her car. She drove back to the city, to the apartment on the north side where Leah's room caught the morning light and where there was food in the kitchen that she had put there herself. She drove through the streets of a city that did not know and would not know most of what had happened inside it over the past 2 years, and she found she didn't need it to know. The accounting was complete, the books were closed, the rest was just living, which was not a small thing. It was, she had come to understand, the only thing that had ever actually mattered.